Despite conflicts such as the Vietnam War, the Iran-Iraq War, and the second U.S. invasion of Iraq, the world has enjoyed relative peace and quiet for almost 80 years. While these and other conflicts may seem like anything but peaceful, the truth is that the long and almost unbroken chain of major wars between large powers was at last broken by the end of World War II. Yet as we swing into the new year, the likelihood of another world war only grows by the day. Here are the places that World War III could actually break out in the new year. Turkey. Turkey has been a steadfast ally of NATO for decades, and yet in recent years that commitment to the alliance has wavered significantly. Ongoing tensions between Greece and Turkey, both NATO members, have put severe strain on the alliance, with Turkey claiming islands in the Mediterranean which belong to Greece. While violence has so far been avoided, numerous airborne interceptions of Turkish fighters by the Greek Air Force have taken place, and just this last summer, the situation reached a boiling point. In defiance of Greek maritime claims, Turkey dispatched a small force of warships along with a survey vessel exploring for oil and gas reserves. As the survey ship was followed by both Greek and Turkish vessels, a collision between a Greek and Turkish ship nearly led to shots being fired. As the two nations continue to clash politically over massive oil and gas reserves of the island of Cyprus, a confrontation only grows more likely. For its part, the U.S., long the bulwark of the NATO alliance, has decided to remain silent on the issue, as President Trump decided the issue was best handled by the EU. So what could happen in the future to spark a world war? Turkey and the U.S.'s own relationship is already severely strained after Trump gave Turkey's Erdogan the green light to attack U.S.-backed Kurds in one of the greatest betrayals in history. After massive backlash from the American public in the U.S. Senate, Trump pulled an about-face and threatened to level massive sanctions against Turkey. This, in turn, drew threats from President Erdogan, who has publicly stated ambitions to possibly seize large stockpiles of American nuclear weapons currently stored at Incirlik Air Force Base inside of Turkey. Should Turkey make a move on the American weapons stored at Incirlik Air Force Base, it would completely overwhelm local American forces and get its hands on a sizable nuclear stockpile. The U.S. would have no option but to respond with full military force. This could potentially lead to a splintering of NATO and possibly the end of the alliance itself. With President Trump giving the cold shoulder to Turkey, the nation is drawn much closer to Russia, and if Putin believes that the U.S. may not have the backing of other European powers, could potentially join the conflict and kick the U.S. out of Europe for good. Iran-Israel. Over the last several months, several Arab nations have formally announced diplomatic ties with Israel, a massive step forward for Middle East peace. Perhaps the most significant step forward, however, might have been the United Arab Emirates' normalization of ties with Israel. However, not every neighbor is growing chummy with Israel, and Iran has pushed back hard on recent developments. Currently, Iran continues to finance, train, and sometimes even directly lead anti-Israel militias and terrorist groups across the region, while Israel has been openly striking at Iranian military targets outside of Iran itself. While Israel slowly builds an anti-Iran coalition across the Middle East, Iran has responded by engaging with various terror groups and militias. Iran's increasing isolation only makes the country more dangerous. Should Iran decide it's in danger of being encircled by pro-Israel states, it might decide to strike preemptively either directly at Israel or at a neighbor such as Saudi Arabia. This would likely come as an unconventional attack using terrorist forces and serve as a warning that nations should continue to distance themselves from Israel or else. Israel might feel it has no choice but to respond or see its diplomatic efforts evaporate, leading to strikes inside Iran itself. With President Trump's ill-advised cancellation of the Iranian nuclear deal, the nation may once more pursue nuclear weapons. While the Iran nuclear deal made it nearly impossible for Iran to build nuclear weapons covertly, now the nation has much more breathing room to do so, and should Israel feel that Iran is nearing the bomb, it might be forced to attack first. This would doubtlessly lead to a catastrophic war which would threaten major parts of the world's oil supply, inevitably drawing both the US and Russia. Kashmir. Ever since the creation of the Indian and Pakistani states, the two have butted heads over the region known as Kashmir. Things only took a turn for the worse when China seized part of Kashmir during the Indo-Chinese Border War of 1962. To date, India and Pakistan have waged 3 wars over Kashmir, along with a variety of other issues that still sees the two countries holding on to very long-running grudges. In recent years, China has grown much closer to Pakistan, much to the chagrin of India, who, for its part, has chosen to develop closer ties to the United States. The situation has become a tinderbox that's ready to go up at any moment. And with both India and Pakistan having ties to the two most powerful nations in the world, a war between the two would indubitably pull in both China and the US. In 2020, it seemed war between China and India was all but inevitable. Starting in early summer 2020, China began a series of incremental crawls, pushing troops forward slowly to inevitably seize control of large swaths of territory. This led to fistfights between Indian and Chinese troops, with one at Pangong So causing 72 injuries on the Indian side and an unknown amount of the Chinese side. China then began to build helipads, pillboxes, and fortified bunkers while reinforcing their troops already present. In a bid to prevent an all-out escalation to war, both sides have agreed to only use firearms if fired on first. However, this has led to a bizarre throwback to medieval times as both sides now carry all manner of improvised weapons, such as clubs, rods, batons, and other melee weapons. On June 15th, a massive 600-man skirmish between both sides led to the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers and an unknown number of Chinese soldiers, though U.S. intelligence states that 35 Chinese soldiers were killed or seriously injured. The incident directly led to the removal of restrictions on the Indian side on the usage of firearms, and another such skirmish might now be met with lethal force, hopelessly escalating the fighting into all-out war. If India were to find itself in a fight with China, Pakistan would almost certainly see this as an opportunity to attack and India forced to fight a two-front war. Even without the intervention of the United States, which would surely back India, this would already be a conflict between three nuclear powers, with the outcome not looking good for the world. Korean Peninsula. Despite an optimistic two meetings between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the historic talks between the two countries inevitably broke down over the issue of nuclear disarmament. For North Korea, disarmament is a non-starter, as the Kim regime believes nuclear weapons is the only way to guarantee the U.S. does not oust it from power as it's done in other nations such as Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. North Korea sees nuclear weapons as the only guarantor of its continued independence against the U.S. and an international coalition of its allies. On a personal level, Kim Jong-un is himself dependent on nuclear weapons for his own political survival. After failing to deliver for years on a working nuclear weapon, the Kim family's hold on power was seriously threatened during the transition from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un. What might have been a moment of temporary weakness, however, was turned into strength as Kim Jong-un immediately initiated a ruthless purging of senior military and political leadership that he saw as a threat to his power. Yet, despite his success in developing nuclear weapons, Kim Jong-un still faces a dicey political environment. As North Korea slowly grows and expands, many of the North Korean elite grow tired of the extreme financial burden international sanctions have placed on them. Incredibly, President Trump may have himself inadvertently helped Kim Jong-un remain in power, though. Despite the objection of every single advisor, the Department of Defense, and the most senior Democratic and Republican leadership, President Trump agreed to meet face-to-face with Kim Jong-un. What he may have seen as a potential diplomatic victory, however, only helped to cement Kim Jong-un's hold on power, as his ministers spun the event into state propaganda showing that at long last, Kim Jong-un had forced the world's only superpower to bend the knee and meet to discuss terms of peace. Now that the Kim family is sure to remain in power and yet refuses to dismantle its nuclear program, a confrontation between the US and North Korea grows ever more likely. Japan, who has for a long time been forced to suffer North Korean missile tests flying directly overhead, may force the US's hand if it decides North Korea presents an imminent threat and launches preemptive strikes against nuclear facilities and missile silos. A conflict between the US and North Korea would inevitably see China dragged into the mix to defend its longtime ally, as the one thing that China fears most is a unified Korean peninsula that's led by South Korea and very pro-US. This would be a strategic disaster for China and one that it cannot abide, leaving it no choice but to join a war against the US. Taiwan. Finally, we reach the most likely flashpoint for World War III. The issue of Taiwan has plagued Chinese-American relations for decades, but in recent years has escalated to a level reminiscent of the 1999 Taiwan Strait crisis. Shortly before taking office, President Trump received a call from Taiwan's president, Tsai Ing-wen, congratulating him on his election. This greatly angered China, which has threatened war should any nation formally recognize Taiwan as independent, and was seen as a major snub to the Chinese Communist Party. Historically, American presidents have not taken such congratulatory calls in order to not anger Beijing and potentially destabilize cross-strait relations between China and Taiwan. Things quickly escalated as Taiwan and the US negotiated a multi-billion-dollar arms sales deal that would see the Taiwanese military receive weapon systems and upgrades that would pose a significant threat to a Chinese invasion on the island. Tensions were heightened when, despite massive Chinese interference in its elections, Taiwan re-elected President Tsai Ing-wen, who holds a staunch anti-reunification agenda. Taiwan's support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong during the months-long riots only further embarrassed the Chinese mainland, as President Xi Jinping remained unable to enforce control over the region. Today, the U.S. is contemplating stationing American Marines in Taiwan on a rotational basis, along with port visits by the U.S. Navy. The U.S. also okayed the construction of a massive computer chip manufacturing plant in Arizona owned and operated by a Taiwanese firm, while simultaneously blocking Chinese company Huawei global access to critical chip manufacturing equipment. These actions have been seen as incredibly provocative by China, who even now is rushing to bolster its long-range attack capabilities with the goal of throwing the U.S. Navy out of the South Pacific. For President Xi Jinping, the Taiwan issue is one of personal and party survival. The Chinese Communist Party has for decades promised to reunify the breakaway island nation, and yet it has failed to do so. This signals to the world an inherent weakness in the Chinese nation, and China does not believe it can be taken seriously as a global power if it can't even bring a next-door neighbor to the fold again. For growing voices of dissent within Chinese politics, Taiwan's continued independence is a sign of the weakness within the CCP, and with his future hold on the nation on the line, President Xi Jinping might be forced at last to turn to the military option to reunify Taiwan. Inevitably, this would drag the US and its allies into all-out conflict with China. Next, check out why you wouldn't survive World War III, or click this other video instead, while you still can.